I don't expect you to believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But I swear to you, everything I'm about to tell you is real. It started the moment I stepped back into my hometown, a quiet, unremarkable place in rural America, where everyone knows everyone. The kind of town where people remember if you so much as get a new haircut, let alone vanish without a trace. I hadn't realized anything was wrong at first. The air smelled the same, the roads were just as cracked as I remembered, and my house was still at the end of the street where it had always been. But when I walked through the front door, I saw my mother's face turn pale. She clutched her chest like she was seeing a ghost. My dad dropped the coffee mug he was holding, the ceramic shattering against the wooden floor. "Where the hell have you been?" His voice was hoarse, shaking. I frowned. "What do you mean? I hesitated, an unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I was only gone a day. My mom broke down sobbing. My dad's hands curled into fists. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen was flooded with unread messages, calls from friends, classmates, even my professors. The last time I had checked it was yesterday, at least what I thought was yesterday. But the date on the lock screen told a different story. I had been gone for 5 weeks, but that was impossible, because for me, it had only been 24 hours. I staggered back, my head spinning, my breath coming in short gasps. The room seemed to tilt around me, and then the memories began to return, flashes of what had happened in that other place. The place where time had twisted into something unnatural. The place I never should have gone. A place that wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, somehow, I had been there. You ever notice how every small town has that one place people don't talk about? Not directly, at least. They'll mention it in whispers, in half-finished sentences, before shaking their heads like it was a mistake to even bring it up. Mine was no different. I grew up in a quiet, sleepy town, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place with a single diner, a gas station that closes at 9, and a high school football team that the locals worship like a damn religion. Nothing exciting ever happened. People lived, worked, and died within the same few miles. And the biggest drama we ever had was whether or not Old Man Carter was going to sell his junkyard. But there was one place people avoided. They called it Blackwood Hollow. It wasn't a house, wasn't a building, or some weird abandoned factory. No, it was just a stretch of woods out past the last row of houses on the west side of town. No fences, no signs, just trees, old and gnarled, tangled together like they were trying to hold something in. I never really thought much about it growing up. It was just one of those things, like how kids dared each other to run up to the edge and throw a rock in before bolting, laughing and swearing they heard something move in the darkness. But now, after everything, I know better. It started with a conversation at the diner. I was sitting at the counter, nursing a bad cup of coffee, trying to wrap my head around the whole missing 5 weeks of my life thing. The town still felt the same, but something was off. People looked at me differently. Kids whispered when I walked past. Even my closest friends kept their distance, like I wasn't really me anymore. That's when I overheard 2 old guys at the end of the counter. Another one, the first man muttered, shaking his head. The other, stirring his coffee with a chipped spoon, just grunted. Ain't the first, won't be the last. I pretended not to listen, eyes on my cup, ears wide open. They found his bike near the hollow. Kid never came back. Shoulda known better. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to look at them, keeping my voice casual. What happened? The first guy, a wiry old man with a face like wrinkled leather, gave me a long look. You don't want to know, boy. The other just snorted. Dumb kid went near the hollow. They always do, and they don't come back. That was it. No further explanation. Like it was just fact. Like saying the sun rises in the east or the water is wet. People go near Blackwood Hollow and they don't come back. I could have left it alone. Should have, probably. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, wouldn't let it go. That night, I asked my dad about it. He barely looked up from his newspaper. It's just a bunch of old stories. People getting lost in the woods, that's all. But I said it's nothing. His voice was sharp, final, and that just made me want to go even more. So, the next night, I grabbed a flashlight, hopped on my bike, and rode straight toward the hollow. And I never should have done that. I swear if I could go back to that night, to that exact moment, I'd grab myself by the collar and shake some damn sense into my own head, but I can't. All I can do now is tell you what happened and hope to God you never make the same mistake. The road leading to Blackwood Hollow was barely a road at all, more like a strip of dirt winding between old trees, their branches stretching overhead like bony fingers. My bike rattled over the uneven ground, tires crunching against dead leaves. The only sound was the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant hum of the highway far behind me. I stopped when I reached the edge of the hollow. The trees were packed so tight together, it was like they were grown to be a wall. I hesitated, just for a second. The air felt weird, too still, too quiet. And then I stepped forward. Nothing dramatic happened. No flash of light, no eerie whisper in the wind. I just walked in. At first, it was just a forest, dark, cold. The trees here were different, taller, thicker, covered in some kind of strange pale moss. My flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness. I kept walking. After about 15 minutes, I should have hit the other side. The hollow wasn't that big, but the trees just kept going, deeper, thicker. The path I was following faded into nothing, swallowed by the underbrush. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. The bridge. It was old. Really old. The kind of wooden bridge you'd see in some historical documentary, except this one looked wrong, like it had been abandoned mid-construction. Some of the planks were missing. The railings were crooked. It stretched over what should have been a dry creek bed, but instead there was nothing. Just darkness. A pit that seemed to go on forever. I should have left right then. But something about it, it was like I had to cross. So I did. One step, then another. The wood groaned beneath my weight. A cold breeze rushed past me, but the trees didn't move. And then I stepped off the other side. It took me a second to realize something was different. At first, I thought it was just my flashlight. The beam flickered, the light dimming as if the batteries were dying. But that wasn't it. The whole world around me looked dimmer, washed out, almost drained. The sky, barely visible through the canopy, was a dull grayish blue, and everything was still. Not just quiet, no wind, no rustling leaves, no distant highway noise. I pulled out my phone to check the time. The screen blinked, 2:14 a.m., but the battery indicator wasn't moving. Frozen. That was when I noticed the fog. It wasn't there before. It crept in around my feet, swirling like it had a mind of its own. My breath hitched, and suddenly my own footsteps felt too loud. I turned back toward the bridge and froze. The bridge was gone. Not broken, not collapsed. Just gone, like it had never been there in the first place. A cold dread crawled up my spine. I spun around, aiming my flashlight into the trees, looking for any sign of a path, a break in the woods, anything. But the more I looked, the more I realized something was wrong. The trees, they weren't natural. They were too straight, too identical, like they had been copied and pasted over and over again, forming an endless, perfect wall. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Okay, stay calm. I just needed to retrace my steps. But the problem was, I couldn't. Because no matter which way I turned, the scenery stayed the same. Left, right, straight, back. The path I had walked in on didn't exist anymore. I was trapped. And somewhere in that frozen, silent forest, something was watching me. I could feel it. I don't know how long I wandered before I saw the light. It wasn't the sun. That damn thing hadn't moved an inch since I got here. It just sat there, stuck in the same dull spot in the sky, like someone hit the pause button on reality. No wind, no birds, no sounds, except my own footsteps crunching against the brittle ground. But the light, that was something different. It flickered, faint and warm, cutting through the fog ahead of me. A fire? A lantern? My pulse quickened. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe someone else was stuck here too. I ran toward it. The house looked abandoned. It sat in a small clearing, its wooden walls warped with age, windows dark and empty. A rusted-out truck sat beside it, half swallowed by the earth, its tires long gone. But the porch? That's where the light was coming from. A lantern, swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze. And then I saw them. 3 people, sitting on the steps, staring at me like I was some kind of ghost. The first was a woman, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing an old denim jacket that looks like it had seen better days. Next to her was a guy around my age, maybe younger, his face sharp and hollow, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. The last was an older man, probably in his 60s, arms crossed, eyes cold and unreadable. The old man spoke first. "Another one." The woman frowned. "He's young." The guy just shook his head. "Poor bastard." I held up my hands, trying to keep my voice steady. "What the hell is this place?" The old man let out a dry chuckle. "Go ahead, Mary. You tell him." The woman, Mary, sighed, rubbing her temples like she'd done this 100 times before. "You crossed over," she said, "and now you're stuck." I didn't want to believe it. I sat on the porch, gripping my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The screen still showed 2:14 a.m. It hadn't changed, not once. I tried restarting it, turning it off and back on, but nothing. Just the same frozen screen, the same date, like time itself had stopped. And then there was the sun. It was still there, still in the exact same position as when I arrived. No movement, no change in light. It should have been dawn by now, but it wasn't. I checked my watch. The second hand ticked forward, then snapped back, like it was fighting against something unseen, trying to move but failing. The younger guy, Sam, watched me with a tired expression. "Yeah, that won't work." I swallowed hard. "How long have you been here?" He hesitated, looked at Mary, then back at me. 4 months. The blood drained from my face. 4 months? The old man grunted. "Ain't that long? I've been here 9 years. My stomach twisted. I felt sick. I looked at Mary. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the frozen sky, her fingers absently picking at a tear in her jacket sleeve. 12 years. My breath hitched. Number? No, that was impossible. They didn't look like they had been here for years. They should have been older, thinner, weaker. But they weren't. Sam still had a boyish face. Mary had barely any wrinkles. Even the old man, despite his white beard, looked stuck at a certain age. Like time wasn't touching them, like time wasn't working at all. I started experimenting. I took a rock and threw it as hard as I could. It sailed through the air, then slowed. I swear to God, it slowed mid-flight, like it was moving through water instead of air. Then it dropped, landing way too softly. I ran in a straight line for what felt like an hour, but when I turned around, the house was still right there. I broke a branch off a tree and set it on the ground. When I picked it up a few minutes later, the break was gone. Like I had never touched it. Everything here wanted to stay the same. Nothing moved, nothing changed, except us. That night, if you could even call it night, since the damn sky wouldn't darken. I sat with the others around the porch, the lantern flickering between us. I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at my brain. "What is this place?" The old man, Henry, leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was low, rough. "Time loop." I shook my head. "No, that's not possible. A time loop means things repeat, but you don't get it, kid. This place doesn't loop. It just stops." He gestured to the sky, the still trees, the quiet air. "We ain't moving forward. We ain't going back. We're just stuck." My skin prickled. Mary spoke up. "There's a legend. Nobody knows how long it's been around. People say there was a man, someone who tried to mess with time, to control it. And somehow, he broke it. Created a place where time got tangled, twisted. Some folks say he's still here. Others say he became a part of it." Sam's voice was barely a whisper. "Some say he's watching." A heavy silence settled over us. A gust of wind suddenly blew past, rattling the trees. And for the first time since I got here, I swear, the sun moved. The worst part wasn't being trapped. It wasn't the frozen sky or the way my watch twitched back and forth like it was glitching out. It wasn't even the fear that I'd be stuck here for years, watching myself slowly go crazy like the others. No, the worst part was the hope, because if there was a way in, then there had to be a way out. Didn't there? The others didn't believe it. Henry just sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with a knife that never seemed to dull, like he'd accepted his fate a long time ago. Sam barely spoke, his eyes hollow, and Mary had the look of someone who wanted to believe, but had already been let down too many times. "There is no way out," she told me one evening, her voice flat. "Not one that works." I refused to accept that. "Then how do you explain the guy who started this? If someone broke time, that means it wasn't always like this. Which means nothing," Henry cut in. "We've all tried, kid. Everyone tries it first." I clenched my jaw. And we're still here. I stopped sleeping. I didn't need to, really. Time wasn't working right, so exhaustion never really hit me. But my mind was a goddamn mess. I wandered, I searched, through the woods, past trees that never changed, across fields that stretched farther than they should. I climbed rocky hills, walked in straight lines, until I found myself back where I started. It didn't make sense. And then I found the cabin. It was buried deep in the woods, half collapsed, covered in ivy. I don't know how long it had been there. Decades, maybe longer. The door hung off its hinges, barely clinging to the frame. Inside, dust coated everything. And on the table, under a layer of grime, was a journal. The first few pages were barely readable. Water damage, age, whatever this place did to things over time. But the middle, that's where I found the words that made my blood run cold. I know the way out, but I can't use it. Time isn't broken here, it's hungry. It lets some go, but it takes something in return. The pages after that were torn out. I turned to the last page, my hands shaking. The ink was smudged, written in frantic, uneven strokes. "You have to give it something. A trade, a sacrifice." And at the very bottom, one last line. "Not everyone gets to leave." I don't remember running back to the house. I burst onto the porch, shoving the journal at Henry. "You knew about this?" He didn't even look at it. "We all find it eventually." Mary crossed her arms, looking away. Sam just stared at his hands, silent. I felt something burn in my chest. Anger, desperation. "You didn't tell me there's a way out." Henry let out a dry chuckle. "Is there?" I flipped through the pages, nearly ripping them in my frustration. "A trade, a sacrifice. What does that mean?" Nobody answered. Then Mary sighed, rubbing her temples. "It means someone else stays." I stopped breathing. Henry nodded, setting his knife down. "You want to leave, kid? Go ahead, find the exit. But something's got to take your place." My stomach twisted. I thought of the others who had been here, the ones who disappeared, the ones the town whispered about, the people who went near Blackwood Hollow and never came back. Maybe some of them did. And someone else had to take their spot. Sam finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's why we don't try anymore." I clenched my fists. "That's bullshit. There has to be another way." Henry just stared at me, eyes cold. "If there is, none of us ever found it." The pages of the journal crinkled in my grip. There was a way out. I just had to figure out what I was willing to trade. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I barely spoke. The journal sat in front of me, open to those final words. A trade. A sacrifice. The ink looked like it had been written in a rush, the letters jagged and uneven, like the writer had been shaking. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt. Not everyone gets to leave. I ran the words over and over in my head until they didn't even sound like words anymore. Henry barely looked at me. "You're wasting your time." Sam kept his eyes low. "You think you're different, but you're not." Mary just sighed. "You'll see." I didn't care what they thought. They had given up. I hadn't. I started experimenting. Every morning, or what should have been morning, if time even worked here, I set out into the woods. I retraced my steps, counted each one, marked trees with deep scratches, broke branches, stacked rocks. Every single time, the marks were gone when I came back. The branches healed, the rocks never moved. Nothing wanted to change in this place. It refused. But the journal had told me one thing. Time wasn't broken. It was hungry. And that meant it could be fed. I don't know when I started hearing whispers. At first I thought it was the others, maybe Sam talking to himself, maybe Henry muttering under his breath. But it wasn't. It came from the woods. Low, curling voices that slithered through the trees, always just out of reach. Give me something. It started with small things, my watch, my flashlight. I left them in the clearing near the house and walked away. When I came back, they were gone. Not buried, not taken by someone else. Just gone. I tried with bigger things. I found an old rusted axe behind the house and tossed it into the trees. The second it left my fingers, the air twisted. A ripple, like heat rising off the pavement, except colder. The axe vanished. I wasn't imagining it. There was something here, and it wanted more. I started pushing, testing. If it took objects, what about something living? The idea made me sick, but I had to know. I caught a rabbit, small, trembling in my hands, heart hammering against its ribs. I carried it out to the clearing, stared into the trees, whispered, "Take it." It looked at me. I don't know how I knew. There weren't any eyes, there wasn't even a shape, just the feeling of being watched, of something ancient and waiting. The rabbit twitched, then it wasn't there anymore, just gone. My stomach twisted, my pulse roared in my ears. I turned and ran back to the house. That night, if you could call it that, I sat on the porch, the journal clutched in my hands. The others were quiet. They knew what I had done. Henry didn't look up. "Now you understand?" I swallowed hard. "So that's it? That's what it takes?" Nobody answered. I felt something burn in my chest. "You all had a choice. You chose to stay." Henry exhaled. "You think it's that easy?" I clenched my fists. "It is that easy. You just weren't willing." I didn't wait for them to argue. I didn't care what they thought. I had what I needed. I just had to decide what I was willing to lose. The next day I stood in the clearing. My breath came fast. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had spent hours trying to convince myself it didn't have to be someone. Maybe if I gave it enough things, enough pieces of myself, that would be enough. But I knew it wouldn't. I heard the door behind me creak open. Footsteps. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Sam's voice was quiet. "You're really gonna do it?" I stared into the trees. "Yeah." A long silence. Then, "Who?" I felt my stomach lurch. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Sam let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's what I thought." I turned, ready to snap at him, but he was already walking away. His shoulders were hunched, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I almost called after him. I didn't. I spent hours in that clearing, staring at the woods, trying to convince myself I wasn't a monster, trying to convince myself I could live with this. But in the end, I wasn't strong enough. I turned around, walked back to the house, sat on the porch, staring at the ground, feeling empty. Henry just nodded. "Now you understand." I didn't leave. Not that day, not the next, not for a long, long time. But one morning, the sun moved again. Just a little. Just enough. And something in my chest clicked. I don't remember much of what happened next. Just flashes. Running, the sky, shifting. A door that shouldn't have been there, standing in the woods like it had been waiting for me. The air smelled like before. I stepped through. When I got back, the world had changed. My phone had service again. The date on the screen made my stomach drop. 2 years. I stumbled into town, expecting things to feel the same. They didn't. My house was still there, but someone else lived in it. My friends had moved on. My mom had a grave. I wasn't missing. I was dead. It's been a year since I got back. I don't sleep much. I don't talk to people. Because sometimes I see it, in the corner of my eye, in the way the leaves don't move even when the wind is blowing, in the way my reflection lags for half a second when I look in the mirror. I got out. I should be safe. But I don't think I came back alone. Time is a tricky thing. It's supposed to be linear, you know? Always moving forward, second by second. But lately I've started feeling, well, off. Like time around me doesn't work quite the same. Maybe it's the fact that I barely sleep anymore. Or maybe it's just that the world feels different since I got back. I can't tell if it's my brain playing tricks on me or if it's something else entirely. Something like, It It starts small, a flicker of the clock in the corner of my kitchen. The second hand stutters, then skips back a notch. I convince myself it's just a glitch. I go about my day, but the feeling sticks with me, gnawing at the edge of my thoughts. Then there's the mirror. One morning, I catch a glimpse of myself and something's wrong. I know it's me, but there's this lag, like my reflection is taking a moment longer to catch up. I don't know, maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm just paranoid. But then it happens again. The clock. The second hand doesn't just stutter, it stops. I stare at it, frozen, for a long time. The digital display above it flashes 2:14 a.m., just like it did when I was trapped in that godforsaken place. I blink, rub my eyes, and look again. 2:14 a.m. Not even the tiniest flicker of movement. Time is holding its breath. I try to ignore it. I go to work. I talk to my friends, but they're different now. They're all fine. Too fine. They've moved on. They don't know the things I know. They don't understand the weight of the seconds that don't pass. But then the phone rings. The screen lights up with an unfamiliar number. And for a split second, I feel that cold knot in my stomach again. That feeling. It's them. But it can't be. They can't still be stuck there. Right? I answer. Hello? Is this really you? The voice sounds shaky, but there's something familiar about it. Something I haven't heard in what feels like a lifetime. Yeah, who is this? I can't place it. It sounds almost like Sam, but it's been so long. Sam, you have to listen to me, he says. I'm still here, in that place. I never left. My stomach drops. You're what? How? I got out. I left. I thought you were... My voice falters. I don't know what to say. How is this possible? I don't know how, but it's not over, he whispers. It's never over. It is still here. It's waiting, and time doesn't work like it should. I don't know if you can hear it too, but the world's already starting to bend again. It's moving, but not like it's supposed to. I think it's calling. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What do you mean, calling? He breathes into the phone, and I can hear the crackling of static in the background. I don't know if we're meant to be here or if we're supposed to leave, but we're stuck. And if you don't do something, if you don't come back, I don't think we ever will. The place, it's feeding. It wants us. It wants more. A chill runs down my spine. My mind flashes back to those last days before I left. The sacrifices, the whispers in the trees, a trade, a choice I made. I don't know if I can, I whisper. The words feel thick on my tongue. I barely got out. I don't even know if I can go back. You have to. Sam's voice cracks. I can feel it. Something's changed. You're the only one who ever made it out. You're the only one who... The line cuts off. I stand there in the middle of my apartment, phone still pressed to my ear, hearing nothing but the faint buzz of dead air. My heart is pounding. I stand frozen, staring at the dark screen. The silence feels too loud, like something's breathing just out of reach, watching me. I try to tell myself it's a mistake, that maybe I've been imagining it all along. Maybe I didn't leave. Maybe I never left. Maybe this is just the next loop. But no, I know the truth. I know what it feels like when time is twisted, when the world isn't what it seems. I want to forget. I want to move on. I want to believe I'm done. I want to believe I'm free. But that hope, that damn relentless hope, won't let me. It claws at me. The fear of what could happen to Sam, to Henry, to Mary, it's too much. I can't just turn away and forget. I grab my jacket and head out the door. The streets are quiet, almost unnervingly so. I barely notice the city lights flickering or the hum of the streetlights overhead. Everything feels distant, like I'm seeing it through a layer of fog. And yet, there's something sharper now, something more real than it ever was before. I'm heading for my car when I hear it, that whisper again. It's not in the trees, it's not in my phone, it's in my head. Come back. It's not a voice, it's a feeling. A force that wraps itself around me, pulls me into a direction I can't escape. I stop, my hand on the car door, heart pounding in my chest. I don't have a choice anymore. I start the engine. The road out of the city stretches in front of me, dark and empty, and I feel that nagging tug deep in my gut. I'm driving, but I'm not sure where I'm going. The world around me flickers, like it's holding its breath. The clock on my dashboard flashes 2:14 a.m. again. I can't escape it, but I keep driving. I don't know what will happen when I get there. I don't know if I'll find a door in the woods or if I'll end up back where I started. All I know is that I can't let them stay. Not when I know there's a way out. The road is long, and the farther I go, the more it feels like the world is closing in around me. And I know one thing for sure. Time isn't hungry anymore. It's waiting.